Today I'm going to show you how I made this rubble temple theme base for a McFarlane Space Marine. This base is a massive 140 millimeters, and it's going to be for an Emperor's Children Marine. What do you call a single miniature that's Emperor's Children? Do you call it an Emperor's Child? Is this an Emperor's Child Marine, and then like the faction is Emperor's Children? What do you call the single? Anyways, if you really like these McFarlane bases and you came here for that big base content, then I made another video for this same exact commission featuring a Soul Haunter base. That'll be in the description below, or you can click this card. This client requested that this base look like old ruins from an ancient city. He specifically sent me pictures of these 32mm bases that had tiles and pillars and old ruins in them, all pushed into some muddy ground. As always, I started off in my sketchbook, sketching out this 140mm circle and then figuring out where exactly I wanted to put down these tiles and pillar pieces. This was also a great way to get a feel for the scale, since I'd be working with actual objects that are going to have to scale to this miniature. The pillar pieces specifically, I wanted to make sure looked like they fit in the scene, but I couldn't make them so ginormous that they would overwhelm this model. I actually did this in parallel with picking out the pillar pieces I was going to use and printing them, so I could get an idea of how big I wanted to blow these things up. Again, I don't want these pillar pieces to be so big into scale that it looks like a giant hunk of pillar on this base and that's all that it is, but I also don't want it to look like it's so small that you don't really get the effect that it's a large crumbled pillar. And of course, I had to make sure that those gigantic Space Marine chonkers could once again sit on top of this base and have room to not allow this model to fall over. I started out by making my tiles out of pink foam. I measured the tiles using my ruler, then I used my pen and hobby knife to create indentations in the foam, as well as starting to chunk away and shape the tiles themselves. I wanted to carve out a lot of imperfections to make it look like these tiles had lost pieces and really corroded. I also wanted to create some natural cracks in the stone, and then I used a piece of aluminum foil balled up to create texture on the top of the foam. Once I felt really great about these, I went ahead and primed each of the tiles individually using my prime and sealant mixture. This would make sure that these tiles were going to be sealed, that they were going to be harder and sturdier, and so that I could put texture foam and all kinds of stuff into them and not have to worry about paint seeping into them or them pulling away from the texture paste too easily. Once again, I went in with my lightweight spackle, mixing in some brown paint and using that as a base layer for the texture and mud across this entire base. I actually put texture paste over this entire base first. I used that as a way to put down the tiles and get a feel for where they were going to be on the base with the actual texture laid down, and I pulled the tiles away. What this did was it created the little bit of texture around the tiles so that would look like a natural sort of mud grout in between each tile. If I had just put the tiles down on top of this texture paste, not lifted them, then I would have had to fill in those crevices myself, or they wouldn't have looked as natural. By actually pressing the tiles down, it gives it that natural effect of making the tiles look like they've seeped. I think in the end, all of these pillar pieces were blown up like 2000% or something ridiculous to get them to a scale where I felt they would fit really well in this base. I had a pretty good idea of my planning phase on where I wanted these pillar pieces to go, and I am so happy I knew that before going into this. Once I finally had all of the elements down and secure, I went ahead and again primed and sealed this with my primer and sealant mixture with 2 coats. I'm going to keep the voiceover pretty simple for this part of the video because the rest of this is just painting it up, and I don't paint it up in any sort of fancy way. I use my apple barrel craft paints, which are great for terrain in large spaces like this, and I really just rely on 4 or 5 main colors, mixing those, layering, wet blending, and then dry brushing. You'll see me start with the mud with the darkest brown color that I have, highlighting that up into a mid-tone and then a highlight tone. I go into the tiles, starting with a pewter color to make it look like the tiles are old and ruined and a little bit dirt stained. And then I start from that darkest color and again work up in hue. So I go up to a mid-tone gray and then I dry brush with my lightest gray. I went and I also created some fine details with smaller brushes and just trying to bring the whole thing together, but really it was a pretty basic paint job. I'll put a list of all the materials that I use on this base in the description below. I had an absolute blast making both of these bases for the client, and I'm really happy how both of them turned out. So yeah, let's check it out. Be sure to give this video a like and share it with your friends if you enjoyed it. If you want to keep up with me outside of YouTube, be sure to follow me on Instagram at NerdicInspiration. And as always, the link to my Patreon is in the description below if you're willing and able to support the channel in that way. Cool.